When a government or a defense contractor wants to build next-generation technology, a stealth bomber or a hypersonic drone, they do not build it in a glass skyscraper in the middle of a city. To keep intellectual property safe from rival nations, human engineers rely on extreme spatial isolation. They build a black site, a highly classified, visually obscured, and acoustically deadened facility completely isolated from the outside world. But humans did not invent the black site. In our previous dossiers, we deconstructed the biological espionage of the canopy and the biometric facial recognition networks these animals use to track their enemies. We know the spies are watching. So we must ask a terrifying question. When a crow actually invents a highly complex tool, where do they go to build it? How do they hide the manufacturing process when the entire forest is looking at them? By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how Corvids select highly specific geographical coordinates, deploy perimeter security, and execute what can only be described as biological acoustic camouflage, and why every single one of those behaviors points to a level of cognitive architecture that most people are not ready to accept. Today, we are declassifying the avian black sites. The Corvid family, ravens, crows, magpies, belongs to the family Corvidae. These are not ordinary birds. Behavioral tests conducted at Emory University place the cognitive performance of crows at a level comparable to a 7-year-old human child. That finding alone should stop you cold. A bird, with a brain the size of a walnut, outperforming benchmarks designed for mammals with vastly larger neural structures. But raw intelligence is only half of the equation. What makes corvids genuinely alarming is what they do with that intelligence under pressure. In 2009, a study highlighted that New Caledonian crows, the species formerly designated Corvus moneduloides, consistently outperformed primates in specific cognitive tasks. Not matched. Outperformed. And by 2014, research had confirmed that ravens could hide both food and tools in complex environments, demonstrating advanced planning abilities that researchers had previously assumed were exclusive to primates and humans. Dr. John Marsluff of the University of Washington, one of the leading researchers in avian intelligence, has stated directly, crows are among the most intelligent animals on the planet. Dr. Alex Kaselnik of the University of Oxford has framed it this way. The ability to plan for the future and use tools is a hallmark of intelligence. These are not casual observations. These are the conclusions of decades of controlled, peer-reviewed experimental science. And the tool-making data is extraordinary. Studies documented by researcher Hunt in 1996 found that New Caledonian crows manufacture tools from leaves and sticks with a success rate exceeding 90% in controlled environments. 90%. That is a production reliability figure that most human assembly lines would consider excellent. These birds are not fumbling through accidental behavior. They are executing a repeatable, high-precision manufacturing process. So when a New Caledonian crow needs to construct a stepped-cut pandanus hook, one of the most geometrically complex tools documented in the non-human animal world, the question is not whether they can build it. The question is where they go to build it without anyone watching. That question brings us directly to the architecture of the black site. To a human observer, a tree is wood and leaves. To a corvid operating under the constant threat of intellectual property theft, a tree is an extraordinarily complex, three-dimensional architectural puzzle. Every branch angle, every density of foliage, every pocket of shadow within the inner trunk structure represents a variable in a spatial calculation that the bird is running in real time. When a New Caledonian crow needs to manufacture a stepped-cut pandanus hook, it cannot simply land on a random outer branch and begin work. The outer canopy is the most exposed zone of the tree. It offers clear sightlines from above, from the sides, and from adjacent trees. Any rival crow perched in the upper canopy has an unobstructed view of anything happening on those thin, exposed outer branches. If the tool is seen mid-construction, a faster or more aggressive competitor can swoop in and steal it before it is even finished. The inventor loses its caloric advantage. The investment of time and energy is zeroed out, and the rival walks away with a weapon it did not have to develop. The risk is not theoretical. Corvids within the same habitat are continuously monitoring each other. Researchers studying New Caledonian crows in field conditions have observed that these birds are acutely aware of being watched. Their behavior changes measurably when they detect the gaze of another bird. They alter their trajectory. They pause. They relocate. The act of being observed triggers an immediate threat response sequence, and that sequence shapes where and how they choose to work. So corvids do not choose random sites. They perform what behavioral ecologists describe as microhabitat selection, a precise, calculated evaluation of the spatial geometry of a potential work location before committing to it. The inner trunk zone of a large, heavily foliated tree functions as a natural blind. The outermost branches carry the leaves that intercept sunlight, but they also intercept sight lines. A crow positioned deep within the inner branch structure, pressed close to the main trunk, sits inside what researchers describe as a shadow zone. From any position in the outer canopy or in adjacent trees, the visual line of sight is broken by multiple layers of overlapping foliage. The geometry of the tree itself creates a natural occlusion field. But the crow is not passively benefiting from this geometry. The selection of the specific branch, at the specific depth within the trunk zone, at the specific orientation relative to the positions of other birds in the area, that is an active calculation. The bird is mentally mapping the positions of potential observers and then selecting a physical location that breaks as many of those sightlines as possible simultaneously. Think about what that requires. The crow must hold a three-dimensional model of the surrounding space in its working memory. It must track the positions of multiple other birds. It must calculate angles of visibility from those positions through the layered structure of the foliage. And it must identify the specific coordinates within that structure where visual detection probability drops to its lowest possible value. That is not instinct. Instinct is repeatable and inflexible. This behavior adapts in real time to the specific configuration of any given tree and any given social environment. It is spatial reasoning applied to a threat model, and it produces an outcome that functions structurally identically to what a human military architect does when designing a concealed operations facility. The University of Cambridge has conducted extensive studies on bird intelligence, and the emerging picture from that body of research is consistent. Corvids are not simply reacting to their environment. They are modeling it. They are running predictive simulations about what other birds can and cannot see, and they are using those simulations to make location decisions before any action begins. And there is one more layer to this. Young corvids learn these behaviors by watching older, more experienced birds. Corvids exhibit documented cultural transmission, the passing of specific techniques and strategies across generations. That means the microhabitat selection protocol is not being independently rediscovered by each individual bird. It is being taught. It is institutional knowledge. The black site construction methodology is a learned, culturally transmitted operational doctrine. Visual camouflage is only half the battle. If a rival spy cannot see you, they might still be able to hear you. And in the silent canopy, the snap of a twig is a beacon. Manufacturing a complex tool requires physical force. It requires tearing, snapping, and bending. And all of that generates acoustic data. If you are a human engineer building a soundproof room, you use acoustic foam to absorb the sound waves before they bounce. Crows do not have acoustic foam, but they do understand the physics of mass and density. When an innovator crow needs to construct a tool in secret, it does not do it on the thin, resonant outer branches. It actively soundproofs its laboratory. Here is the physics. When a twig snaps, it generates a high-frequency sound wave. That wave travels outward in all directions at the speed of sound through air, which is approximately 1,125 feet per second. On a thin, outer branch, there is almost nothing to interrupt that wave. It radiates outward into open air and can be detected by any bird within the surrounding area. But when the same snap occurs deep within the inner trunk zone of a large tree, the wave must immediately pass through a wall of dense, damp wood mass before it can travel outward. The physics of acoustic absorption are governed by the mass and density of the material the wave must pass through. Dense, wet wood has a dramatically higher acoustic impedance than open air, which means it resists the passage of the sound wave. The high frequency energy of that snap, the sharp, crisp crack that carries the most identifying information gets absorbed and converted into heat energy within the first few centimeters of dense wood. What emerges on the other side, if anything, is a low, muffled thud that attenuates rapidly over distance. Damp moss performs a similar function. The cellular structure of moss traps air in microscopic pockets that act as individual absorption chambers. When a sound wave hits a thick layer of damp moss, those air pockets compress and expand, dissipating the wave's kinetic energy across millions of tiny absorption events, rather than allowing it to travel as a coherent wave. This is precisely the same physical principle that acoustic foam uses in a recording studio or a classified military briefing room. The geometry differs. The principle is identical. Corvids working in inner trunk zones are, whether through deliberate calculation or tightly calibrated learned behavior, positioning themselves inside a natural acoustic baffle system. The outer branches serve as a physical sound wall. The dense, damp material of the inner trunk and any associated moss growth absorbs and disperses the high-frequency acoustic signature of tool manufacturing before it can propagate into the open canopy. Research into Corvid behavior, published through the 2010 through 2023 period, has increasingly focused on the social dynamics of tool use, and a consistent pattern emerges. Corvids working on complex tool construction preferentially select locations that are not just visually concealed, but also acoustically sheltered. The preference for inner trunk zones and dense foliage clusters is not random. It is not simply a matter of seeking physical support for delicate manufacturing work. The acoustic properties of those zones are part of the selection calculus. Consider the engineering precision this implies. The bird is not just choosing a location that looks hidden. It is choosing a location that sounds hidden. It is running a multi-channel threat assessment across at least two separate sensory domains, visual and acoustic, and selecting the site that minimizes its detectability signature across both simultaneously. Some researchers caution against overstating the intentionality behind these behaviors, arguing that we should be careful not to attribute human-style deliberate planning to animal behavior without direct evidence of conscious intent. That is a fair methodological concern. But the behavioral outcome is functionally indistinguishable from intentional acoustic engineering. Whether the bird is consciously aware that it is deadening sound, or whether the behavior was selected for because it produced better outcomes over generations, the result is a creature that builds its tools inside what operates, in every measurable way, as a soundproofed facility. Common ravens, documented as living up to 40 years in the wild, have enough generational time to refine these behaviors to a level of extraordinary precision. 40 years of environmental feedback, 40 years of testing, which sites get rated and which sites do not. 40 years of calibrating the selection criteria for the optimal black site location. They have broken the line of sight. They have deadened the acoustics. The black site is operational. But what happens when the facility is threatened? How do they defend a location that is supposed to be a secret? Even the most heavily guarded facilities in the world require security. You cannot build a weapon and guard the door at the same time. This requires a division of labor. While the innovator is deep inside the acoustic dampening zone manufacturing the tool, the airspace above must be secured. This is where the social hierarchy of the flock shifts into a paramilitary operation. Corvids are deeply social animals with well-documented hierarchical structures. Within a mated pair or a flock, there is a clear distribution of roles, and those roles become operationally specialized during sensitive activities like tool construction. The sentinel function, the role of standing guard over a high-value activity, is documented across multiple corvid species and is most consistently filled by the alpha bird or the mate of the innovator. The sentinel does not sit inside the work zone. It positions itself at elevation, above and slightly outside the concealment area, where it has maximum sightlines across the surrounding airspace. This positioning is not accidental. It mirrors exactly the logic of a military overwatch position. High ground, broad field of view, distance from the asset being protected, and clear communication lines to the unit being guarded. The acoustic communication between Sentinel and Innovator during these operations is one of the most fascinating elements of Corvid behavioral research. Corvids possess a highly complex vocal repertoire, Researchers have documented that different call structures carry different informational payloads. High-frequency alarm calls, which carry well through open air, are used for general flock alerts. But shorter, lower-frequency contact calls have been observed being used between mated pairs and between birds engaged in collaborative activities, calls that do not project strongly over long distances and therefore do not broadcast the location of the worksite to the wider environment. The Sentinel, in other words, does not simply scream when it detects a threat. It uses a call with a deliberately limited acoustic range, delivering the alert to the innovator without illuminating the coordinates of the laboratory to every other bird in the vicinity. The signal is directional and range limited by design. That is not random vocalization. That is targeted, encrypted short-range communication. When the perimeter is breached, when a rival crow or a predator crosses the invisible boundary of the work zone, the response escalates immediately. Corvids are documented practitioners of mobbing behavior in which multiple birds converge on a threat and conduct coordinated, aggressive aerial attacks. Mobbing is not a chaotic panic response. It is organized, it is sustained, and it is brutally effective. A single corvid will not typically challenge a bird of prey directly, but 3 or 4 corvids mobbing in coordinated formation have been documented driving off birds significantly larger than themselves, including hawks and owls. The tactical logic of the mob response to a perimeter breach is to achieve 2 objectives simultaneously. First, to make the cost of remaining in the work zone's proximity prohibitively high for the intruder. Second, to buy time for the innovator to either complete the tool, secure it, or execute the evacuation protocol. The Sentinels are not just sounding an alarm. They are buying operational time. Research on Corvid territorial defense has found that this behavior is also deeply tied to spatial memory. Ravens and crows remember specific individuals who have previously encroached on their territories, and they respond with greater intensity to known repeat offenders than to first-time intruders. That means the defense of the black site is not just reactive. It is informed by historical threat data. The Sentinels are not simply reacting to whoever shows up. They are applying a threat ranking system based on prior behavioral data about specific individuals. This connects directly to the broader picture that researchers like Dr. Marsluff at the University of Washington have been building. Corvids maintain long-term, individualized social databases on both allies and adversaries. That database informs every aspect of their security operations, including who gets deployed as a sentinel, which intruders trigger maximum response, and which locations carry a higher historical threat profile. But sometimes the perimeter falls. A spy slips past the sentinels and breaches the black site. When a human military base is overrun and highly classified intelligence is at risk of falling into enemy hands, the commander issues a final order. Burn it all down. Crows use the exact same Scorched Earth protocol. The moment an inventor crow realizes its acoustic camouflage has failed and a spy is watching, it executes a bug-out order. It will not fight for the tool. Fighting risks the spy stealing it during the scuffle. Instead, the inventor will intentionally destroy the prototype, drop it into a dark crevice, or abandon the black site entirely. They will burn their own classified facility to the ground, driven by the behavioral calculation: if I cannot have this, you will not have it either. This behavior connects to a concept in behavioral economics called spite, taking an action that costs you something, specifically to prevent a rival from gaining a benefit. In standard evolutionary biology, spite was long considered paradoxical. Why would an animal expend energy to destroy a resource rather than simply fleeing and letting the rival take it? The energy cost of the destruction action provides no direct benefit to the actor. It should, by the classical logic of natural selection, be eliminated over time. But corvids are not operating within the framework of classical natural selection models. They are operating within a complex, long-term social environment where information about capability and willingness to deny resources to rivals is itself a form of power. A crow that is known to burn its own tools rather than let them be stolen sends a signal to every other crow in the area. Stealing from this individual does not pay off. The deterrence value of the Scorched Earth response, accumulated over time and reinforced through the flock's social memory, may well outweigh the cost of destroying a single tool. The cessation behavior is immediate and complete. Researchers have observed that the moment an innovator crow detects that it has been observed mid-construction, all tool-making activity stops instantly. There is no hesitation, no attempt to finish quickly, no effort to protect the tool while continuing work. The protocol is binary. Either the site is secure or all activity ceases and evacuation begins. The tool itself is treated as a compromised asset. If the spy is close enough that retrieval would require passing through the spy's field of view, the innovator abandons the tool entirely. If a crevice or a dense tangle of branches is available, the partially constructed tool gets dropped into it, deliberately placed somewhere inaccessible, denying the rival the ability to examine the design, reverse engineer the geometry, or complete the construction. The prototype is buried rather than surrendered. And then comes the most striking element of the entire protocol. 2019 research confirmed that crows remember the locations of hidden objects for extended periods with high spatial precision. That same spatial memory that allows them to recover cached food across vast distances and extended time periods also allows them to flag specific locations as compromised. A black site that has been breached does not get reused. The innovator's spatial memory links that specific location with a threat event, and that location is effectively burned from the operational map permanently. This is not a temporary avoidance response. Corvids do not simply avoid a location for a few days and then return when the immediate threat has passed. The location itself is reclassified as hostile infrastructure, and the bird permanently redistributes its operations away from it. A safe house that has been burned once is burned forever. The cognitive demand of this behavior is staggering. The bird must maintain a spatial database of not just where things are cached, but which sites are operationally clean and which sites are compromised. It must update that database in real time based on threat events. And it must make immediate, high-stakes decisions under pressure about whether to defend, evacuate, or destroy, all while processing acoustic and visual threat data simultaneously. Dr. Alex Kaselnik at the University of Oxford has noted that the ability to plan for the future is a hallmark of intelligence. What the Scorched Earth Protocol demonstrates is something beyond planning. It demonstrates the ability to make strategic sacrifices in the present to alter the long-term competitive environment. That is a form of reasoning that most cognitive scientists, until the Corvid research of the past 3 decades forced the question, would have placed firmly in the category of uniquely human capability. The arc of Corvid research across the 1940s through the 2023 period has been a steady, relentless dismantling of that assumption. Initial research in the 1940s and through the 2000s focused primarily on documenting that corvids were unusually intelligent relative to other birds. That was the first shock. Then came the tool use documentation in the 1990s, proving they did not just understand their environment, but actively modified it. Then, the primate comparison data, showing they outperformed species with significantly larger brains in specific cognitive domains. Then, the cultural transmission evidence, proving the knowledge was institutional rather than individual. And now the strategic deception and asset denial behaviors, showing that their intelligence is not just reactive and technical, but social, adversarial, and long-term. Common ravens, living up to 40 years in the wild, a lifespan that far exceeds most other bird species, accumulate decades of operational experience within these systems. A raven that has spent 40 years refining its black site selection criteria, its acoustic camouflage protocols, its sentinel communication networks, and its scorched earth decision-making, has effectively become a specialist with a career longer than most human professional lifespans. The behavioral sophistication is not just a product of raw cognitive horsepower. It is the product of decades of operational feedback loop refinement within a complex adversarial social environment. And corvids exhibit documented forms of cultural transmission, where younger birds learn these behaviors by watching and interacting with older, more experienced individuals. That means the institutional knowledge of where the best black sites are, how to deploy sentinel networks, when to execute the Scorched Earth Protocol, All of it flows from generation to generation. The birds are not reinventing the operational doctrine with each new individual. They are inheriting it, refining it, and passing it forward. That is the architecture of an institution. That is the structure of a species that has developed, over time, something that functions as a classified operational manual. The architecture of the black site proves that Corvids understand visual obscurity, acoustic physics, and tactical asset denial. They go to extreme lengths to protect their intellectual property, but no defense is perfect. And sometimes the spies win. What happens when a spy does not just steal a physical tool, but steals the concept of the tool? We are about to enter the era of avian corporate espionage. When one flock invents a revolutionary new design, rival flocks will literally deploy operatives to steal the prototype, reverse engineer the geometry, and trigger a massive, localized industrial revolution. To see how crows are actively hacking open source tech and disrupting the entire canopy economy, click the video on your screen right now. The biological patent war has just begun. I will see you in there.